beneath the blazing sun of ancient Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates carved their eternal paths through desert sands, rose the greatest city the world had ever known. The metropolis stretched across the fertile plain like a jewel cast upon brown earth, its massive walls reaching toward the heavens, its ziggurats gleaming white against the endless blue sky. Within these walls lived 250,000 souls, farmers and merchants, craftsmen and scribes, warriors and laborers, all bound together in humanity's first great urban experiment. Yet for all its magnificence, this wonder of the ancient world suffered under a terrible shadow. Its ruler, though blessed with strength beyond mortal measure and wisdom surpassing ordinary men, had become a tyrant whose cruelty knew no bounds. The sovereign stood 7 cubits tall, his frame carved from bronze and sinew, his eyes burning with immortal fire. The heavenly powers had fashioned him from sacred clay, mixing 2 parts celestial essence with 1 part earthly flesh, creating a being who walked between 2 realms. No warrior could match his prowess in battle. No hunter could track prey with his skill. No builder could conceive monuments to rival his architectural visions. But authority without compassion breeds only suffering. The citizens knew this truth intimately. Each dawn brought fresh torments from their God-born master. Young men found themselves dragged from their families to construct ever more grandiose monuments and palaces, their backs bent beneath massive stones quarried from distant mountains. They labored until their hands bled and their spirits broke, all to satisfy an insatiable hunger for glory. Worse still were the nights when wedding celebrations echoed through the city's streets, for the monarch claimed the ancient right of rulers, the privilege of lying with any bride before her husband could know her touch. No father could protect his daughter from this sacred violation. No bridegroom dared challenge the royal claim. Wedding ceremonies became occasions of mourning, joy transforming into bitter tears as families watched their most precious moments stolen by decree. The irony cut deep. Under this harsh rule, the metropolis had become the wonder of the ancient world. Royal engineers diverted rivers to create the most sophisticated irrigation system ever conceived, transforming barren desert into gardens of abundance. Architects raised the great ziggurat Anu, its stepped tiers climbing toward the realm of eternity, like a mountain crafted from human ambition. The city's fortifications, broad enough for 2 chariots to race abreast along their tops, stretched for 9 miles around the urban sprawl. Trade flowed into the city from every corner of the known earth. Caravans brought cedar wood from distant Lebanon, lapis lazuli from the mountains of Afghanistan, gold from the southern deserts, and copper from Anatolian mines. Workshops hummed with activity as craftsmen transformed these materials into objects of breathtaking beauty. Jewelry that captured sunlight in precious metals, textiles dyed in colors that seemed to hold pieces of rainbow, weapons whose edges could split hairs. Yet none of these achievements brought happiness to the inhabitants. What use were magnificent monuments when their builders collapsed from exhaustion? What joy could fine goods bring when their creators lived in fear? The contradiction tormented those who remembered earlier times. Elder merchants recalled when the young heir first claimed the throne, full of noble intentions. They spoke quietly of his early years, when he had listened to advisers, shown mercy to enemies, and walked among his subjects as their protector rather than their oppressor. Something had transformed his nature. Some wound or disappointment had twisted nobility into tyranny. Perhaps it was the burden of his celestial heritage. Mortality and godhood warred within his breast, creating a restlessness that no earthly pleasure could satisfy. Born to bridge 2 worlds, he found himself belonging fully to neither. too immortal for human friendship, too mortal for heavenly acceptance. He stood isolated atop the pyramid of authority. The ruler's daily routine reflected this spiritual emptiness. Dawn found him in the palace gymnasium, wrestling with bronze-armed champions until their bones cracked. Midday brought inspections of construction projects, driving workers beyond their limits with demands for impossible speed and perfection. Afternoon councils saw him issue decrees with the arbitrary finality of natural disasters, taxation that impoverished prosperous families, laws that criminalized ancient customs, punishments that far exceeded their supposed crimes. Most disturbing were his midnight wanderings through the city's streets. Citizens learned to bar their doors and extinguish their lamps when word spread that their sovereign walked abroad, for these nocturnal journeys inevitably ended with someone's property confiscated, someone's daughter claimed, or someone's life destroyed on a whim. Religious life suffered perhaps worst of all. The monarch claimed celestial sanction for his actions, twisting sacred traditions to justify his cruelties. Holy men found themselves caught between their duty to the heavens and their fear of earthly wrath. They watched helplessly as ancient rituals were modified to glorify the throne rather than honor the immortal powers. Sacred ceremonies became celebrations of royal authority rather than spiritual renewal. This corruption poisoned the relationship between the city and the realm above. The celestial powers had created their champion to be their representative on earth, a bridge between mortal and immortal worlds. Instead, they watched their chosen instrument become a source of suffering for the very souls he was meant to protect. In the council chambers of heaven, where immortal beings debated the fate of the world below, the tyrant's name was spoken with growing concern. Anu, the Sky Father and chief of the pantheon, listened to reports from messengers who traveled between Earth and eternity. Enlil, the Storm Lord who governed the fate of cities, grew increasingly agitated by the cries rising from the great metropolis. Ea, the wise master of fresh water and wisdom, counseled patience but acknowledged that intervention might become necessary. The breaking point came during the celebration of Ishtar, goddess of love and war. This sacred observance, held at the season's turning, when the earth renewed itself, had traditionally been the city's most joyous occasion. Families gathered to honor the feminine aspect of creation, lovers pledged their devotion, and the entire community celebrated the forces that brought life into the world. But the tyrant transformed the ceremony into a display of his own authority. He commandeered the central rites, presenting himself as Ishtar's earthly consort and demanding that all celebrants acknowledge his celestial status. When elderly clergy attempted to maintain traditional rituals, he had them publicly flogged. When young couples tried to exchange vows according to ancient custom, he insisted that all marriages receive his personal blessing, a blessing that invariably included his claim to the bride's first night. The horror reached its peak when a young woman named Shamhat, a sacred servant dedicated to Ishtar's service, attempted to intervene on behalf of a terrified bride. She stepped forward with the courage of her calling, reminding the monarch that even rulers must respect the goddess's sacred rites. For a moment, the crowd held its breath, hoping that some remnant of nobility might respond to this brave appeal. Instead, rage exploded like a thunderstorm. The tyrant seized Shamhat by her sacred robes and declared that if she wished to defend heavenly law, she could serve his pleasure as payment for her insolence. The priestess's scream echoed across the celebration grounds as he dragged her toward his palace, while thousands of witnesses stood frozen in helpless terror. That night, as Shamhat's cries carried across the city's walls and the ruined ceremony grounds lay empty beneath the stars, something fundamental shifted in the cosmic order. The prayers and lamentations of an entire population rose like incense toward the heavens, carrying with them a plea that could no longer be ignored. In her celestial palace, Ururu, the mother goddess who had shaped the first humans from clay, felt the anguish like a physical wound. She, who had given life to countless generations, could not bear to see her children suffer under the very champion she had helped create. The time for intervention had arrived, but this would not take the form of thunderbolts or floods. The immortal powers had learned that destroying the wicked often brought greater suffering to the innocent. Instead, Ururu conceived a plan, both elegant and profound. She would create a companion for the tyrant, someone who could match his strength and challenge his arrogance, someone who might awaken whatever nobility still slumbered within that corrupted heart. The solution would come from the wild places beyond civilization's reach, from the realm where human nature remained pure and untainted by the corruptions of authority. There, among the beasts and beneath the open sky, the immortals would fashion a champion who could stand against their fallen creation, not through cruelty, but through the simple strength of an uncorrupted soul. As dawn broke over the great city following that terrible night, the inhabitants emerged from their homes with faces marked by grief and rage. They had endured much from their God-born ruler, but the violation of their most sacred celebration had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. In markets and workshops, in homes and gathering places, the same desperate prayer rose from countless lips, a plea to any higher authority that might still care for mortal suffering. They prayed for deliverance. They prayed for justice. They prayed for someone, anyone, who could stand against the tyrant who ruled them. In the wilderness beyond the city walls, where lions hunted gazelle and eagles soared above endless grasslands, their prayers were about to be answered in ways none of them could possibly imagine. In the wilderness beyond the great city walls, where no human footprint marked the ancient paths, and civilization remained but a distant dream, the goddess Ururu knelt beside a pristine spring. The water bubbled up from deep within the earth, untouched by mortal hands, carrying with it the pure essence of creation itself. Here, in this sacred place where heaven touched earth, she would craft her answer to the prayers rising from the oppressed. Taking clay from the riverbank, the same primordial substance from which all life had first emerged, Ururu began her work. Her hands moved with the rhythm of eternity, shaping and molding, breathing purpose into formless matter. This creation would be different from the tyrant who ruled behind walls of stone, where one had been crafted to bridge two worlds. This being would embody the untamed strength of the earth itself. As the goddess worked, she whispered into the clay the essence of every living thing that roamed the grasslands. The speed of the gazelle, the courage of the lion, the wisdom of the eagle, all flowed through her fingers into the figure taking shape beneath her touch. When lightning split the sky above, she caught its fire and pressed it into the being's heart. When thunder rolled across the plains, she captured its voice and placed it within his throat. The moment of animation arrived. Ururu breathed into the nostrils of her creation, and life sparked within the earthen form. Eyes opened, deep and brown as fertile soil, holding within them the innocence of the newly born and the ancient wisdom of the earth itself. The being drew his first breath, tasting air sweet with the scent of growing grass and blooming flowers. He stood, magnificent in his nakedness, 7 cubits tall like his destined counterpart, but carved from different dreams entirely. Where the city's ruler bore the sharp angles of ambition and the hard lines of authority, this new creation flowed with grace. His hair fell in thick waves past his shoulders, dark as the rich earth from which he had emerged. His skin, kissed by wind and sun, from the moment of his making, glowed with the health of one who knew no poison of corruption or excess. The goddess smiled upon her handiwork and spoke a single word that would define his existence: Enkidu. It meant creation of the god Enki. Though this being belonged to no single deity, but to the forces of life themselves. As Uruk faded back to the celestial realm, leaving only the faintest shimmer in the air to mark her presence, the newly born wanderer looked upon the world with wonder. Everything was new, everything held mystery and possibility. The grass beneath his feet felt alive with tiny movements. The wind carried 1,000 different scents, each one a story waiting to be understood. The sky stretched above him, vast and blue and calling to something deep within his soul. A sound caught his attention, the soft lowing of cattle grazing nearby. Moving with instinctive grace, he approached the herd. The beasts showed no fear of this naked figure who emerged from the grassland. Instead, they welcomed him as one of their own, pressing close to nuzzle his hands and shoulders. He found himself understanding their simple needs, their contentment with the rhythm of eating and resting that marked their days. Soon, other beings discovered this strange new presence in their domain. Deer approached without skittishness, drawn by something in his essence that spoke of kinship rather than threat. Lions padded up to investigate, their golden eyes holding curiosity instead of hunger. Birds settled on his shoulders and in his hair, their songs creating a symphony of welcome that echoed across the plains. For months beyond counting, this forest dweller lived among the beasts as their brother and protector. He learned their languages, the warning bark of the fox, the territorial roar of the great cats, the complex calls that guided migrating herds across vast distances. His body grew strong from running with the gazelles, swimming with the river horses, climbing with the mountain sheep. His senses sharpened until he could track a beetle's path through grass or identify individual eagles by the sound of their wing beats. The four-legged ones came to depend on him. When men from distant settlements approached with their snares and spears, the earthborn guardian would appear like a spirit of the grassland itself, his presence causing prey to vanish into hidden ravines and secret valleys. He filled in the pits that trappers dug, broke the mechanisms of their devices, and scattered their carefully laid plans. To the inhabitants of the plains, he had become both protector and guide. His guardianship extended beyond mere interference with human pursuit. When drought threatened water sources, he would lead entire herds to hidden springs, known only to the oldest inhabitants. During harsh winters, he showed them sheltered valleys, where grass still grew green beneath protecting cliffs. In times of plenty, he taught the younger ones which plants nourished and which brought sickness, which paths led to safety and which harbored danger. The forest dweller knew nothing of cities or rulers, of written words or constructed laws. His morality was simple and pure. Protect the innocent, share abundance, respect the order that connected all living things. He had never seen worked metal, woven cloth, or cooked food. Fire was the lightning that split the sky during storms, not something to be tamed and controlled for human purposes. Water came from streams and springs, not channels carved by engineering. Shelter meant caves and tree hollows, not buildings raised by architectural design. Yet despite his contentment in this paradise, sometimes the earthborn one would feel a strange stirring in his breast. Standing on high hills as the sun set behind distant mountains, he would sense some incompleteness in his existence. The feeling was not unhappiness. He knew too much joy in his simple life for that, but rather like a song with missing notes, a tapestry with spaces yet to be filled. These moments of longing always passed when his four-legged friends called him back to their immediate needs. There were always young ones to be taught, territories to be defended, seasonal migrations to be guided. The rhythm of earthly life swept him along in its ancient patterns, and the undefined yearning would fade into the background of his consciousness. Meanwhile, in the farming settlements that dotted the edges of the grasslands, strange stories began to circulate. Those who pursued game returned from expeditions with tales of supernatural encounters, snares found broken, devices destroyed, herds that vanished like morning mist at the approach of human tracking parties. Some claimed to have glimpsed a figure moving among the beasts, tall and powerful as a hero from ancient legends, but disappearing so quickly that they questioned their own eyes. One pursuer spoke of tracking a magnificent lion for 3 days, only to discover his quarry drinking peacefully from a spring in the company of gazelles and sheep, enemies sharing the same water source without fear or aggression. At the center of this impossible scene sat a naked man, his hair streaming with water, his presence somehow creating peace among beings that should have been locked in the eternal struggle of predator and prey. Another told of pursuing a herd of aurochs, following their tracks through increasingly difficult terrain, until he found himself lost in a maze of ravines and blind canyons. As night fell and panic began to grip his heart, he heard a sound unlike anything in his experience. A voice that was human, yet somehow larger, calling across the darkness with words he could not understand, but that filled him with inexplicable comfort. Following that voice, he found his way back to familiar territory, though he never discovered its source. These tales might have remained merely campfire stories, shared among those who lived by pursuit to explain their failures and embellish their adventures, if not for one persistent man whose livelihood depended on success. This weathered veteran of the frontier between towns and grassland had noticed patterns in the disruption of his work. The destroyed snares were not random. They showed intelligence, planning, even a kind of mercy that removed the mechanisms without harming nearby beasts. Determined to solve this mystery that was costing him his trade, the man decided to keep watch over his devices. For 7 nights, he hid among the rocks near his most reliable hunting ground, waiting for the mysterious saboteur to reveal himself. His patience was finally rewarded when the moon was dark and the stars provided the only illumination. From the shadows emerged a figure that made his breath catch in his throat, taller than any man he had ever seen, moving with the fluid grace of a great cat. The forest dweller moved among the snares with casual efficiency, but it was not the destruction of his equipment that held the watcher spellbound. It was the sight of this naked giant surrounded by a court of beasts that followed him like subjects attending their beloved sovereign. Deer walked at his sides, their usual nervousness replaced by complete trust. Lions padded behind him, their terrible strength rendered gentle by his presence. Birds perched on his shoulders and arms, creating a living cloak of feathers and song. Even the smallest ones, rabbits and squirrels, foxes and badgers, moved in his wake like a miniature army following their commander into battle. The observer watched in awe as this impossible procession moved through the moonlit landscape. When the earthborn guardian knelt to examine a snare, his followers arranged themselves around him in protective formation. When he stood and moved to the next device, they flowed with him in perfect coordination. It was like witnessing the spirits of the earth made manifest, the secret harmony that lay beneath the apparent chaos of the world. When dawn came and the strange company melted away into the growing light, the man found himself changed by what he had witnessed. This was no ordinary being who lived among the beasts. This was something touched by the divine powers themselves, a figure who embodied the freedom that existed before cities and laws and the complicated structures of organized life. Racing back to his village, the observer sought out the eldest inhabitants, those who remembered the oldest stories and maintained the ancient wisdom. To them, he told his tale, describing every detail of the miraculous sight he had witnessed. The elders listened with growing excitement, recognizing in his account something from their most sacred traditions. "The gods have sent a champion," whispered one ancient woman, her eyes bright with possibility. "A pure heart to stand against the corruption that poisons the world." "But he is too removed from human ways," worried another elder, "too distant from our customs. How can one who has never known organized life challenge one who rules it?" The question hung in the air, like incense, heavy with implication. For if this forest guardian was indeed heaven's answer to their prayers, then somehow he must be brought into contact with the world he had been created to change. The challenge lay in bridging the vast gulf between his innocent freedom and the complex corruption of structured existence. The answer, when it came, would prove as ancient as desire itself and as transformative as the first dawn that had awakened consciousness in the human heart. For there were forces in the world that could reach across any gulf, that could transform the most innocent soul and awaken in them the full complexity of human experience. In the great city, where the tyrant continued his oppression and the citizens continued their suffering, events were already in motion that would forever alter the destiny of both the organized and the free. The elderly observer who had witnessed the forest dweller made his way swiftly through the dusty roads leading to the great metropolis. His weathered hands clutched a small pouch of silver coins, his life's savings offered as payment for an audience with those who might know how to approach this miraculous being. The stories he carried burned within him like fire, demanding to be shared with someone who possessed the wisdom to understand their significance. Upon reaching the massive gates, he sought out the temple complex dedicated to Ishtar. Here, among the courtyards and perfumed chambers, dwelt those women who served the goddess through the ancient rites of love and fertility. These priestesses understood the deepest mysteries of transformation, the divine powers that could awaken desire and consciousness in even the most innocent hearts. The eldest among them, a woman whose name was whispered with reverence throughout the city, listened carefully to his tale. The priestess had survived the tyrant's violation through strength of spirit that amazed even her sisters. Though scarred by her ordeal, she had emerged with her calling intact. Her understanding of love's transformative power deepened rather than destroyed. "This woodland protector you describe," she murmured, her dark eyes thoughtful, "sounds like no ordinary man. If he truly lives as brother to the beasts, untouched by the complications of our world, then he possesses what our tormented ruler has lost, the purity of an uncorrupted soul." The other temple servants gathered around as the priestess continued her analysis. But purity alone cannot challenge tyranny. This protector must be awakened to the full spectrum of awareness, both its beauty and its sorrow, its wisdom and its folly. Only then can he understand what he fights for and what he fights against. The process they proposed was as old as consciousness itself. Through the arts of love, they would send one of their number to find this forest dweller and guide him across the threshold from simple wildness into the complex realm of awareness. The transformation would be irreversible. Once awakened to knowledge, he could not return to his previous state of contentment. "I will go," the priestess declared, her voice carrying the weight of destiny. "I have looked into the heart of corruption and survived. Perhaps I can help this pure soul understand both the darkness and the light that dwell within mortal hearts. Preparations took 3 days of careful planning. The temple woman would need guides who knew the grasslands, provisions for the journey, and most importantly, the oils and perfumes that were part of her divine calling. As she made ready for the expedition, word of the mission reached the ears of the city's ruler through his network of spies and informants. The tyrant's response was swift and characteristic. If indeed some champion had been sent by the heavenly powers to challenge him, then this threat must be neutralized before it could develop. He summoned his most trusted general and issued secret orders. Follow the priestess, observe this supposed protector, and if he proved dangerous, eliminate him before he could reach the city. The general, a scarred veteran of countless campaigns, accepted these orders with the grim efficiency that had made him valuable to his master. He selected 12 of his finest warriors, men whose loyalty was absolute and whose skills in stealth and assassination were legendary among the army. These soldiers had carried out similar missions before, striking down potential rivals and threats before they could challenge the throne. Thus, 2 expeditions set forth from the metropolis under the same blazing sun, one carrying the hope of transformation, the other bearing the shadow of violence. The temple woman traveled openly with her guides, while the soldiers followed at a distance, their bronze weapons glinting beneath concealing cloaks. The journey to the grasslands took 7 days of hard travel through increasingly wild terrain. As they moved farther from the walls and towers, the very air seemed to change, feeling cleaner and more alive with possibilities. The priests who accompanied the temple woman, as her guides had learned from local shepherds, the general area where the mysterious protector had been observed. But finding one specific being in the vast expanse of rolling hills and hidden valleys would require both patience and divine favor. Their opportunity came at a watering hole that served as a gathering place for both domestic herds and their cousins from the wild. As the sun reached its peak on their 3rd day of searching, the priestess and her companions concealed themselves among the rocks overlooking the spring. They did not wait long before the most extraordinary sight any of them had ever witnessed began to unfold. From the eastern hills came a procession that belonged more to legend than to earthly reality. Leading a vast company of beasts strode the figure they sought, tall and magnificent, his skin bronzed by sun and wind, his hair flowing like a mane around shoulders that could have been carved from living stone. But it was not his physical presence that struck the watchers speechless. It was the sight of the court that followed him. Lions walked beside gazelles without hostility. Bears shambled alongside deer without thought of predation. Eagles perched on the backs of mountain sheep, while serpents glided peacefully among the hooves of cattle. The very laws of the natural world seemed suspended in the presence of this being, who had somehow awakened the original harmony that had once united all living things. The priestess felt her breath catch as she observed him more closely. Every movement spoke of grace learned from the creatures around him. His laughter rang across the water as young animals played at his feet. His touch gentled the most skittish beasts with effortless authority. Here was purity made manifest, virtue given form and substance. Yet as she watched him drink from the spring, cupping the clear water in his hands, she also saw a different quality, a sadness that flickered across his features when he thought himself unobserved, a searching quality in his gaze as he looked toward horizons he had not explored. The longing that had touched him during his solitary moments on the hilltops was growing stronger, though he himself did not yet understand its nature. Hidden among the rocks farther back, the assassins also watched this display with growing unease. They had come prepared to eliminate a potential threat to their master's rule. But what they witnessed challenged their understanding of both threat and loyalty. This woodland protector showed no signs of ambition or cruelty. His very presence seemed to radiate peace and protection. Even the hardened warriors found themselves questioning whether eliminating such a being would serve justice or merely perpetuate tyranny. "He is ready," the priestess whispered to her companions. "His soul yearns for more than his current life can provide. The awakening will be a gift as much as a transformation." As evening approached and the great assembly of beasts dispersed to their various shelters, the temple woman made her preparations. She bathed in the waters she had carried from Ishtar's shrine, anointed herself with oils that carried the essence of divine femininity, and clothed herself in garments that revealed rather than concealed the beauty of her form. These were not mere physical preparations, but rituals that aligned her with the goddess whose power she channeled. The night passed slowly for all the watchers. The priestess meditated on the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. The assassins debated among themselves whether to proceed with their mission. And somewhere in the darkness, the forest protector dreamed dreams that carried hints of transformations he could not yet comprehend. When dawn painted the eastern sky with fingers of gold and rose, the woodland guardian returned to the watering place as was his custom. But this morning, instead of finding only the familiar company of his four-legged friends, he discovered a sight that stopped him in his tracks. A figure so beautiful, so unlike anything in his experience, that his very breath seemed to pause in his throat. The priestess sat beside the spring, like a vision from a dream he had not dared to imagine. Her skin glowed with the same golden light as the rising sun, while her dark hair cascaded around her shoulders like a waterfall of shadow and silk. But it was her eyes that held him captive, deep pools that seemed to reflect not just his image but his very soul, filled with an understanding that pierced through to the core of his being. For long moments, they simply looked at each other, the space between them charged with possibilities that neither fully comprehended. The beasts that had followed their protector to the water seemed to sense the momentous nature of this encounter. Rather than approaching the spring, as was their usual practice, they remained at a respectful distance, watching with the patient wisdom of creatures who understood that some moments belonged to forces greater than their daily needs. "Who are you?" the protector finally asked, his voice rough from surprise and recognition, though what he recognized he could not yet name. "I am called by many names," she replied, her voice carrying melodies he had not heard but somehow recognized as the music his heart had been waiting to learn. "I am a daughter of the goddess, sent to offer you a gift that will change everything you think you know about the world." "What gift could be greater than the life I already possess?" he asked. Though even as he spoke the words, he felt their inadequacy. Looking at this luminous being, he sensed there were forms of awareness he had not imagined, depths of experience that remained hidden from his understanding. The priestess rose gracefully and approached him, each step deliberate and fluid as flowing water. "The gift of knowledge," she said softly. "The awakening of desires you do not yet know you possess. The understanding of what it means to be truly aware rather than merely content." She reached out and touched his face with fingers that seemed to carry starlight. At that contact, everything fundamental shifted in the woodland protector's consciousness. For the first time in his life, he became aware of his own nakedness, not as the simple state of all creatures, but as a condition charged with meaning and possibility. For the first time, he looked upon another being and felt not just kinship or protectiveness, but a yearning that reached toward mysteries he had not contemplated. "Come," the priestess whispered, taking his hand in hers. "Let me show you the first of the great secrets that separate awareness from the simple contentment of the beasts. She led him away from the watering place, away from the watching eyes of his four-legged friends, into a grove of ancient trees whose branches created a cathedral of green shadows and dancing light. There, on ground carpeted with soft grass and scattered flowers, she initiated his education in the most fundamental of experiences. What followed was a transformation as profound as the creation that had first brought him into being. Through the arts of physical union, guided by one who understood its deepest meanings, the woodland protector crossed the threshold between simplicity and knowledge. His consciousness expanded like a flower opening to the sun, revealing chambers of awareness he had not suspected could exist within him. The awakening took 7 days and 7 nights. Each dawn brought new revelations, each sunset new understanding. The priestess taught him not just the physical aspects of love, but its emotional and spiritual dimensions as well. She showed him how desire could transcend mere bodily pleasure to become a force that connected souls across the apparent barriers that seemed to separate one being from another. But with awakening came consequence that could not be avoided or reversed. When the intensity of revelation finally faded and he attempted to return to his companions at the watering place, he discovered that everything had changed in ways that cut deep into his heart. The beasts that had once welcomed him as their brother now regarded him with confusion and growing wariness. His scent, his manner, his very essence had been altered beyond their recognition. A young gazelle that had often played at his feet now shied away from his approach. A lion that had once accepted his touch with purring contentment now watched him with guarded eyes. One by one, his oldest friends and closest companions turned away from him, returning to the grasslands without him, leaving him alone in ways he had not known were possible. The loss struck him like a physical blow that left him gasping. In gaining awareness, he had forfeited his place in the realm of simple contentment. He could no longer speak the wordless language that had connected him to his four-legged brothers. Their world, which had once embraced him completely, now felt foreign and distant, separated from him by a gulf that seemed impossible to bridge. The priestess, who had observed this painful separation with knowing sadness, approached him as he stood alone beside the spring. "This is the price of awakening," she said gently. "You cannot return to what you were, but what you can become is far greater than what you have lost." "What am I now?" he asked, his voice heavy with grief for the companionship that had been stripped away. "You are aware," she replied, "with all the complexity and contradiction that entails. You are capable of love that transcends physical desire, of loyalty that endures beyond convenience, of courage that faces impossible odds, of wisdom that comes only through suffering. You are no longer merely innocent. You are capable of choosing between good and evil, which makes your choices meaningful in ways that simple contentment could not achieve." Over the following days, the priestess became his teacher in the complexities of conscious life. She showed him how to prepare food with fire rather than eating only what grew or could be taken raw. She taught him to fashion clothes from animal skins and woven grass, explaining how covering the body was not just protection from the elements, but a marker of the boundary between civilized awareness and wild instinct. She explained the concepts of ownership and trade, showing him how the accumulation and exchange of goods created webs of obligation and opportunity that bound communities together. She described laws and customs, the intricate social structures that governed life within settlements and cities. Most importantly, she told him stories, tales of heroes and villains, of the great metropolis beyond the grasslands, of the tyrant whose cruelty had prompted the gods to create a champion who might stand against him. His name is Gilgamesh, the priestess said as they sat beside a fire she had taught him to kindle and maintain. He was created to be a bridge between mortal and divine realms, but power has corrupted his noble purpose. He oppresses those he was meant to protect, destroys what he was meant to preserve, and brings suffering where he should bring justice. The protector, who had now accepted the name Enkidu as his own, listened with growing intensity. Each detail of the tyrant's cruelties awakened a burning sense of righteous anger within his transformed heart. He who had spent his life protecting the innocent could not bear to hear of virtue betrayed by one who possessed the power to defend it. She told him of the wedding nights stolen, the young men worked to death on grandiose projects, the arbitrary executions that served no purpose beyond displaying power. She described the festival where she herself had been violated, and how the cries of the oppressed rose to heaven each night, like incense carrying desperate prayers for deliverance. "I must face him," Enkidu declared, his voice carrying a new quality of steel that would have been foreign to his earlier self. "If I was created to be his equal, then it is my duty to call him to account for his crimes." "You will," the priestess assured him. "But first, you must understand the world you seek to change. Come with me to the city. See with your own eyes what his rule has wrought. Only then will you be ready for the confrontation that will determine the fate of thousands." Unknown to either of them, their conversation was overheard by ears that had been trained to report such discussions. The soldiers who had followed the expedition remained hidden among the rocks and trees, their bronze weapons ready, their orders clear. But as they listened to the discourse between priestess and protector, uncertainty crept into their resolve. This champion spoke not of conquest or personal ambition, but of justice and protection for the innocent. His transformation from beast friend to conscious awareness had been accomplished through divine rites, not dark sorcery. Even his anger at their ruler's crimes seemed righteous rather than vindictive. The soldiers faced a choice that would echo through the ages. They could fulfill their orders and attempt to eliminate this potential threat before he reached the city, or they could allow destiny to unfold as the gods apparently intended, trusting that divine will might accomplish what mortal strength had failed to achieve. In the end, it was the memory of their own families, wives and children who suffered under the tyrant's cruel decrees, that decided them. The captain of the assassins made a decision that would have cost him his life if discovered. Silently, he gestured for his men to withdraw from their concealment and return to the city, leaving Enkidu and the priestess to continue their preparations undisturbed. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of the world's greatest metropolis. Two champions, both created by divine will, but shaped by vastly different experiences, would soon meet in a clash that would determine whether tyranny or justice would rule the land between the rivers. As Enkidu gazed toward the horizon, where the great city lay hidden beyond the curve of the earth, he felt the weight of destiny settling upon his shoulders. He had been created in purity, awakened through love, and now he must be tested through conflict. The transformation of the woodland protector was complete, but his greatest challenges still lay ahead. The journey to the great metropolis took 10 days across terrain that grew increasingly cultivated as they approached civilization's heart. The woodland warrior marveled at the transformation of the landscape. Wild grasslands giving way to ordered fields, irrigation channels cutting geometric patterns into the earth, villages clustering around wells and trading posts in precise arrangements. Each mile brought new wonders and new sorrows, as his guide pointed out both the achievements and the costs of organized society. They passed work gangs, laboring under the blazing sun, building roads that would carry tribute to the treasuries. The forest-born watched with growing anger as overseers struck workers who moved too slowly, their whips leaving bloody welts on backs already scarred from previous beatings. These men had once been farmers and craftsmen, his companion explained, conscripted into service and worked until their bodies failed or their spirits broke. "Why do they not resist?" the transformed warrior asked, his hands clenching into fists as he witnessed another brutal punishment. "Because resistance means death," his teacher replied sadly, "and because they have families who depend on their meager wages for survival. The tyrant has created a system where compliance brings suffering, but rebellion brings annihilation." They encountered a merchant caravan whose leader wept openly as tax collectors seized 3/4 of his goods. The man had spent months gathering cedar wood from distant mountains, trading fairly with forest peoples and risking his life on dangerous roads. Now his profits would fill the warehouses, while his family faced poverty, and his trading partners would receive nothing for their labors. At a village well, they found women drawing water in the hour before dawn, their faces marked by exhaustion and fear. These were the mothers and sisters of conscripted workers, rising early to complete their household tasks, before walking miles to deliver food to the construction sites where their men labored. Many carried infants born to women whose husbands had been taken for projects, children who would grow up knowing their fathers only by brief visits stolen from work details. The sacred guide used these encounters to deepen her companion's understanding of the complex web of oppression that bound the kingdom. The sovereign's cruelty was not merely personal vice, but systemic evil that touched every aspect of life. Laws that seemed reasonable on their surface, taxation to fund public works, labor service for community projects, oversight of commerce, had been twisted into instruments of exploitation that drained the people's strength while feeding an insatiable appetite for grandeur. As they crested the final hill before their destination, the forest-born's breath caught at his first sight of the metropolis that would define his destiny. The walls rose before them in worked stone, their massive blocks fitted so precisely that not even grass could grow between them. Towers and battlements crowned the fortifications, while banners bearing insignia snapped in the wind in colourful displays marking territory. But it was the sounds that truly conveyed the character of this place. The constant hammering of construction, the grinding of mill wheels, the shouting of merchants and the crying of children, all blending into a symphony of organized chaos that spoke of vast energies, focused on purposes both magnificent and terrible. The gates stood open during daylight hours, guarded by soldiers whose bronze armor gleamed in polished display. These men examined every person seeking entry, demanding explanations for their presence and payments for their passage. The sacred woman approached with confidence born of her status, but the newcomer drew stares and whispers from guards who had encountered nothing quite of his description. "What is he?" murmured a soldier to his companion, noting the stranger's unusual size and the way he moved with predatory grace despite his civilized clothing. "Trouble," his partner replied, though whether he meant trouble for the metropolis or trouble for someone specific remained unclear. Inside the walls, the transformed warrior found himself overwhelmed by sensations his wilderness life had not prepared him to experience. The press of bodies in narrow streets, the smell of cooking food mixed with human waste, the constant noise of commerce and construction, all of it crashed over him in a flood, threatening to drown his consciousness in pure sensation. His guide led him across the maze of districts that made up the urban landscape. They passed workshops where craftsmen hammered bronze into intricate shapes, their skill evident in every piece they created. They walked among markets where goods from across the known world competed for buyers' attention, spices that made the air dance with exotic scents, fabrics that caught light and captured rainbows, jewelry that transformed mere metal and stone into objects of breathtaking beauty. Yet everywhere they went, the forest-born saw signs of the oppression his teacher had described. Artisans worked with the desperate intensity of those who knew their output was monitored, and their livelihoods dependent on meeting impossible quotas. Merchants kept careful records not of their profits, but of the tributes they owed to various levels of administration. Even children played games that mimicked the hierarchies that governed their parents' lives. The sacred district provided a brief respite from the harsh realities. Here, in courtyards shaded by ancient trees and cooled by flowing fountains, clergy maintained rituals that connected the earthly realm to the celestial powers above. The architecture spoke of harmony instead of domination, with curved lines and natural materials creating spaces that felt alive instead of merely functional. But even here, the tyrant's influence could not be escaped. His guide pointed out modifications to traditional designs, additions that glorified achievements instead of honoring the immortals, inscriptions that elevated status to near celestial levels, artwork that portrayed the sovereign as the equal of eternal powers instead of their servant. He seeks to remake the very relationship between earth and heaven, she explained, as they stood before a statue that depicted the monarch receiving authority directly from the chief deities. Not content with earthly dominion, he claims celestial sanction for his every whim. Their destination was a modest shrine dedicated to Ishtar, where his teacher maintained her residence when not serving at the great central sanctuary. Here, in chambers decorated with symbols of the goddess's dual nature as bringer of both love and war, the transformed warrior would complete his preparation for the confrontation that awaited him. The head clergy of the sanctuary, an elderly woman whose eyes held the wisdom of decades spent in service, examined the newcomer with keen interest. She had heard the stories of his transformation and understood the cosmic significance of his presence in the metropolis. "You carry the mark of the immortals upon you," she said after studying him carefully. "But do you understand the weight of the destiny they have placed upon your shoulders?" "I understand that innocents suffer while their protector has become their oppressor," he replied. "I understand that authority without compassion creates only misery. I understand that someone must stand against tyranny, even if that person was born only months ago in a grassland far from here." The elder smiled at his directness. Wisdom often comes not from years, but from clarity of purpose. You have been awakened not just to desire, but to justice. That awakening will be tested in ways you cannot yet imagine. Over the following days, servants completed the warrior's education in the customs and expectations of urban life. They taught him the proper forms of address for different social ranks, the protocols for challenging authority figures, the legal procedures that govern disputes between equals. Most importantly, they explained the traditional right of any citizen to demand single combat with those who had wronged them, an ancient law that even the tyrant could not openly violate without losing all legitimacy. Meanwhile, word of the strange newcomer's presence had reached the palace via the network of informants that kept the monarch informed of all significant events in his domain. Descriptions of the forest-born's unusual appearance, his obvious strength, and his connection to the sacred district created a buzz of speculation among courtiers and advisors. The sovereign himself received these reports with amusement instead of concern. He had grown so accustomed to his dominance that the possibility of serious opposition seemed absurd. If some wilderness savage wished to test himself against anointed authority, so be it. The contest would provide entertainment for the court and a useful demonstration of what befell those who dared oppose their betters. The confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. On the morning of the 5th day after the warrior's arrival, he walked from the sacred district toward the palace complex at the metropolis's heart. Word of his approach spread across the streets in wildfire fashion, drawing crowds who sensed they were about to witness something unprecedented. The encounter took place in the great square before the palace gates, a space traditionally used for proclamations and public ceremonies. By the time the forest-born arrived, hundreds of citizens had gathered, their faces reflecting a mixture of excitement, fear, and desperate hope. The monarch emerged from his palace dressed in full regalia, a crown of gold that caught the morning sunlight, robes of purple silk that proclaimed his status, jewelry that displayed the wealth of his kingdom. He moved with the casual arrogance of one accustomed to automatic deference, expecting this encounter to follow the pattern of countless previous opposition from ambitious nobles or foreign warriors. But when he saw the challenger standing in the center of the square, something flickered in his eyes that might have been recognition, not of the individual, but of something deeper and more disturbing. Here was someone who matched his own extraordinary height and build, who radiated the same sense of being more than merely human, who carried himself with the confidence of one who had not known defeat. "So," the monarch said, his voice carrying clearly across the square, "you are the wilderness creature who thinks to oppose anointed authority. Tell me, savage, what delusion has brought you before the throne of the chosen representative?" The forest-born stepped forward, and when he spoke, his words rang with the clarity of absolute conviction. "I oppose you, not as a savage opposes civilization, but as justice opposes tyranny. I am the forest warrior, created by the immortals to stand against the corruption that has poisoned what should have been noble. You have violated the trust placed in you, betrayed the people you were meant to protect, and made yourself a curse upon the land instead of its blessing." The accusation hung in the air in thunderclap fashion. No one in living memory had spoken to the sovereign with such directness, such fearless condemnation. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting to see whether this unprecedented opposition would be met with violence or something even more dramatic. The monarch's face darkened with rage, but beneath the anger was something else, a flicker of uncertainty that suggested the words had found their mark. "You dare speak of purpose to the one who embodies it. You dare oppose the one whose authority flows directly from the immortals themselves. I oppose someone who has forgotten that authority is a gift to be used in service, not a weapon to be wielded for pleasure," the warrior replied. "Face me in single combat, if you have the courage to back your claims with action instead of words." What followed was a battle that would be remembered as long as the metropolis stood. Two beings of superhuman strength and celestial heritage met in combat that transcended mere physical contest to become a clash between opposing visions of what it meant to hold authority. The sovereign fought with the skill of decades of warfare, his movements precise and deadly, his strength augmented by the finest training and equipment the kingdom could provide. But the forest-born fought with something more dangerous, the righteous fury of someone who had seen purity betrayed and found it intolerable. They grappled in Titan fashion, their contest shaking the very stones of the square. Neither bronze nor iron could withstand the forces they unleashed, weapons shattering against flesh that had been touched by celestial fire. They fought with fists and feet, with holds and throws that would have killed ordinary men, their battle ranging across the square in localized earthquake fashion. The crowd watched in awe and terror as these two forces of nature tested each other's limits. Here was raw strength made manifest, the kind of might that had shaped the world in its earliest days when immortals walked openly among mortals. But as the combat continued, something unexpected began to happen. Via the exchange of blows, during the testing of each other's resolve and skill, a strange recognition passed between the combatants. Each found in the other something that had been missing from his own existence, an equal, someone who could truly understand the burden of being more than human. The sovereign discovered that his opponent fought not for personal glory, but for principles that resonated with his own half-forgotten ideals. The forest warrior realized that beneath the tyrant's cruelty lay a tortured soul who had lost his way, instead of the inherently evil creature he had expected. The battle ended not with victory or defeat, but with mutual recognition. They stood facing each other in the center of the square, both bloodied, but neither broken, both having found what they had not known they were seeking. "You fight with the strength of the immortals," the monarch said, his voice holding a note of wonder that had been absent for years. "You fight in a manner that suggests you remember what it means to be noble," the warrior replied. "Perhaps that memory can be awakened fully." And in that moment, witnessed by hundreds of citizens who had expected to see a champion fall, something unprecedented occurred. Instead of enemies, the two celestially born warriors became friends, brothers united by shared nature and mutual respect. The transformation was immediate and profound. The monarch who had terrorized his people for years suddenly saw his kingdom with different eyes, eyes that had been opened by finding someone who could oppose him without seeking to destroy him. The forest-born, who had been created to stand against tyranny, discovered that redemption might be possible, even for those who had fallen furthest from grace. The crowd erupted in a mixture of confusion and hope. They had witnessed not just a physical contest, but a spiritual transformation that would reshape their world. The two champions stood together now, their friendship forged in combat, but destined to accomplish far more than either could have achieved alone. But the immortals, who had created the forest warrior to humble the tyrant, were not entirely pleased with this outcome. They had intended punishment, not redemption, a lesson in justice, not a demonstration of mercy. The friendship that had been born from combat would soon face tests that neither champion could anticipate, ordeals that would force them to discover whether their bond was strong enough to withstand celestial displeasure. For now, though, the people of the great metropolis allowed themselves to hope. Perhaps their long nightmare of oppression was ending. Perhaps the immortals had indeed sent deliverance, though in a form none of them had expected. And perhaps in the friendship of these two extraordinary beings lay the seeds of a new kind of leadership that could bring justice without cruelty, strength without oppression. The first chapter of their partnership had been written in the dust of the palace square. The chapters to come would test whether such a friendship could survive the ordeals that awaited any who dared to defy the established order of the world. The brotherhood forged in combat transformed both champions and their kingdom in ways that rippled outward from the palace square. The ruler who had governed by fear discovered the joy of companionship with an equal, as the woodland warrior found purpose beyond mere opposition to tyranny. Together, they began to reshape the metropolis according to principles neither had fully understood during their solitary struggles. The changes came swiftly. Harsh labor quotas were reduced to levels that preserved human dignity. Tax collections, though still necessary for the kingdom's function, no longer stripped families of their basic needs. The arbitrary executions and public humiliations that had terrorized the population ceased entirely, replaced by a justice system that considered circumstances and sought remediation instead of mere punishment. But the most significant transformation was in the rulers themselves. The monarch, freed from the isolation that authority had imposed on him, rediscovered the noble impulses that had been buried beneath years of unchecked command. His companion, awakened to the complexities of leadership, learned that true strength sometimes required restraint, and that wisdom often meant choosing mercy over vengeance. Their days were filled with adventures that became legends throughout the land. They hunted lions in the desert, not for sport, but to protect trading caravans from predators. They explored ancient ruins across the kingdom's borders, seeking treasures of knowledge instead of mere gold. They competed in contests of strength and skill that pushed both champions to their limits as they entertained the citizens who gathered to watch their friendly rivalries. The people of the metropolis flourished under this new order. Markets bustled with renewed energy as merchants no longer feared arbitrary confiscation of their goods. Artisans created works of unprecedented beauty, inspired by rulers who valued excellence over mere productivity. Children played in streets where laughter had replaced the fearful whispers that had once characterized public gatherings. Yet even in this golden time, shadows gathered at the edges of their happiness. The immortals watched these developments with growing concern. They had created the woodland champion to humble pride and restore celestial order, not to enable the very ruler they had sought to chastise. The bond that had brought such joy to earthly hearts was seen in ethereal realms as defiance of heavenly will. The goddess of love and war felt particular displeasure at these developments. She had suffered humiliation when her advances had been rejected years earlier, and the sight of the monarch's happiness with his newfound brother awakened old resentments. If she couldn't possess the affection she desired, perhaps she might destroy the bond that had replaced it. The opportunity came during the festival, celebrating the kingdom's prosperity under the new dual leadership. The celebration lasted 7 days and nights, with citizens from across the realm gathering to honor their transformed rulers. On the final evening, as the festivities reached their peak, the goddess descended from her celestial palace to walk among the earthbound. She appeared in the form of a woman of extraordinary beauty, her skin luminous as pearls, her hair flowing in starlight cascades, her garments woven from moonbeams and shadow. Every step she took left flowers blooming in her wake, and her voice carried melodies that made hearts race with sudden longing. The deity approached the royal pavilion where the two friends sat sharing wine and stories of their adventures. Her presence commanded the attention of every person in the square, but her focus remained fixed solely on the ruler who had once spurned her advances. "Great king," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent celebration, "I have watched the transformation with interest. You have discovered the joy of true companionship, the pleasure of ruling with wisdom instead of force. Surely now you are ready for an even greater gift, the love of the goddess herself." The offer hung in the air in incense fashion, heavy with implications that every witness understood. To be chosen by the deity was to receive blessings that transcended earthly comprehension: eternal youth, victory in all endeavors, pleasure that surpassed human limitations. But it also meant abandoning all other loyalties, all other loves, to serve the goddess's desires alone. The monarch rose slowly, his face grave as he considered the magnitude of what was being offered. Beside him, his woodland brother watched with growing unease, sensing the trap hidden within the beautiful proposal. "Mighty goddess," the ruler replied, his voice respectful but firm, This offer honors me in ways that exceed measure. But I must ask, what of those who have accepted such gifts in the past? What became of Tammuz, the shepherd, whom you loved and then condemned to the underworld? What of Alalu, the eagle, whose wings you broke when his song no longer pleased you? What of Ishulanu, the gardener, whom you transformed into a spider when he dared to refuse advances? The litany of the goddess's former lovers and their fates created a ripple of unease across the assembled crowd. These stories were known to all, but few had ever dared to speak them aloud, especially in the presence of the deity herself. The goddess's beautiful face darkened with fury at this public recitation of her cruelties. You dare to throw my past actions in my face? You think newfound wisdom makes you immune to celestial displeasure? I think, the monarch replied steadily, that true love does not destroy what it claims to cherish. I think that wisdom lies in learning from the experiences of others. And I think that the greatest gift you might offer would be to respect the choice I make freely, instead of demanding submission to divine will. The rejection stung even more sharply this time, coming as it did before thousands of witnesses and delivered with such reasoned eloquence. The goddess's rage exploded in volcanic fashion, her celestial nature burning away the illusion of human form, to reveal the terrible beauty that earthbound beings were not meant to perceive directly. If you will not accept my love, she snarled, then perhaps you will accept my wrath. I call on my father Anu to send the bull of the sky to destroy the city and its people. Let us see how long precious bonds endure when faced with ethereal retribution. The goddess vanished in a whirlwind of wind and flame, leaving behind only the scent of burning roses and the echo of her terrible promise. The celebration dissolved into chaos as people fled for their homes, recognizing that they had witnessed a confrontation that would have consequences far exceeding their ability to influence or escape. In the celestial realm, the goddess presented herself before her father Anu, with tears streaming down her immortal cheeks. "Father," she wailed, "I have been insulted past endurance by the earthly king. He has rejected my love not once, but twice, and done so in public view of thousands. My honor demands satisfaction." Anu, ancient and wise in ways that surpassed earthly comprehension, looked at his daughter with sympathy, tempered by understanding of the broader implications. "Child, you know that humans are free to accept or reject celestial offers. That freedom is essential to their nature and their purpose." "Then what of my honor?" the goddess demanded. "What of the respect due to the immortals? If earthbound beings can spurn our gifts without consequence, what becomes of the order that separates the ethereal from the terrestrial?" The question struck at fundamental principles that governed the relationship between celestial and earthly realms. After long contemplation, Anu reached a decision that would satisfy his daughter's wounded pride and teach humans the cost of defying eternal will. "Very well," he said finally. "I will send the bull of the sky to their city. But know this, the consequences of this action will fall not only on those who have offended you, but on innocents as well. The responsibility for their suffering will rest as much on my shoulders as on those who provoked anger." The bull of the sky was a creature of pure destruction, born from the primal forces that had shaped the world before order was imposed on chaos. Its breath might wither crops for miles around, its hooves shatter stone, its roar drive humans mad with terror. When it descended to earth in a pillar of fire and darkness, the very ground trembled beneath its weight. The beast materialized in the heart of the metropolis, its massive form filling the great square where the bond of the champions had first been forged. Citizens fled screaming as it bellowed its rage to the sky, the sound shattering windows and toppling weakened walls throughout the district. But if the goddess expected the champions to cower before this manifestation of celestial wrath, she was swiftly disappointed. The ruler and his woodland brother emerged from the palace armed with weapons that gleamed with their own inner light, blades forged by the finest smiths in the kingdom, and blessed by priests who understood that sometimes humans must stand against the very powers that created them. The battle that followed was epic in scope and terrible in its intensity. The bull of the sky fought with the mindless fury of a natural disaster, its every movement causing destruction that spread far past the immediate combat zone. Buildings collapsed beneath its weight, flames erupted wherever its breath touched stone or wood, and the air itself seemed to burn with supernatural heat. Against this force of pure destruction stood two friends whose bond had been tested by conflict and strengthened by shared purpose. They fought as they had learned to live, in perfect coordination, each anticipating the other's moves, each covering the other's weaknesses. The ruler used his knowledge of warfare and tactics to direct their strategy, as the woodland warrior employed the instincts honed during his years among wild creatures to anticipate the beast's attacks. The contest raged for 3 days and nights, devastating entire districts of the city as the combatants ranged across the urban landscape. The champions showed wounds that would have felled ordinary men, but their celestial heritage gave them strength to continue fighting, even as their blood stained the stones beneath their feet. On the fourth dawn, as the sun rose over a city transformed by battle into a landscape of rubble and smoke, the tide finally turned. Working together with perfect timing, the two friends managed to corner the bull of the sky against the great wall that surrounded the metropolis. In a coordinated assault that combined their individual strengths into something greater either might achieve alone, they brought down the creature. The ruler drove his blade deep into the creature's heart as his brother severed its massive head, with a stroke that channeled all his righteous fury into a single devastating blow. The bull of the sky collapsed with a death roar that shook the foundations of the earth, its essence dissipating into motes of light that drifted skyward in sparks from a dying fire. The victory celebration was muted by the devastation that surrounded them. Thousands of homes had been destroyed, countless lives lost, and the prosperity that had marked their joint rule lay in ruins around them. Yet the people who emerged from the wreckage looked at their champions with renewed devotion, recognizing that without their intervention, the destruction would have been total. But the greatest cost of their triumph was yet to be revealed. In the council chambers of the ethereal realm, the immortals gathered to assess the implications of what had occurred. Two humans, even humans touched by celestial essence, had slain a creature of pure eternal force. Such defiance might not go unanswered without undermining the very foundations of cosmic order. Enlil, Lord of the Storm and Keeper of Eternal Law, spoke for the assembled powers. The Earthbound have proven their strength, but they have also demonstrated their willingness to oppose the ethereal realm itself. Such defiance cannot be tolerated. If both live, they will inspire others to similar rebellion. One must die as payment for their hubris. The debate that followed would determine the fate of the bond that had transformed a kingdom. Some argued for the death of the ruler, whose original crimes had prompted the creation of his companion. Others insisted that the woodland warrior, as the more recent creation, should bear the penalty for defying eternal will. In the end, it was the manner of their offense that decided the matter. The bull of the sky had been sent specifically in response to the rejection of the goddess's advances. Though both champions had fought the creature, only the woodland-born had compounded the insult by helping to dismember its corpse in a display of triumph that bordered on mockery of celestial authority. The sentence was delivered via dreams that came to both friends on the same night. They saw visions of the underworld, that grim realm where the dead wandered in endless twilight, and understood that one of them was destined to journey there during life. When they woke and shared their dreams, the truth became clear. The woodland warrior had been chosen to pay the price for their victory. Eternal justice demanded a life, and the immortals had selected the one whose defiance had been most flagrant. The news struck the ruler in the manner of a physical blow. To lose the bond that had redeemed his soul, to watch his brother die for crimes they had committed together, seemed a cruelty that exceeded endurance. Yet there was no appeal from eternal judgment, no earthly power that might overturn the decision of the celestial council. As the first symptoms of the curse began to manifest in his companion, a fever that no earthly medicine might cure, a weakness that grew stronger each day despite his supernatural constitution, the monarch faced the possibility of returning to the isolation that had once made him a tyrant. The thought of ruling alone again, of facing the challenges of leadership without the counsel and companionship that had made them bearable, filled him with a despair deeper in magnitude he had known. But perhaps, he thought in desperate hope, there might be another way. If celestial power might impose death, might not eternal force also grant life? Somewhere in the world, according to ancient legends, lived beings who had achieved immortality via various means. If he might find such a person, learn their secrets, perhaps he might save his friend and preserve the bond that had become more precious to him in comparison to his own life. The seeds of a quest were planted in that moment of desperate hope, a journey that would test not only his physical courage, but his understanding of what it truly meant to be human. For in seeking to cheat death, the ruler would discover truths about mortality, bonds, and the nature of existence that would transform him in ways even more profound in comparison to his original meeting with the woodland warrior. But for now, all he might do was watch helplessly as eternal justice took its inexorable course, and prepare himself for a loss that would shatter his world and send him wandering into the wilderness of his own despair. The curse manifested itself slowly at first, like shadows creeping across the land at sunset. The woodland warrior's magnificent strength began to ebb in ways that defied understanding. His bronze skin, once radiant with vitality, took on a pallor that spoke of approaching darkness. The laughter that had filled the palace halls grew quieter each day, replaced by silences that stretched between the two friends like chasms opening in familiar ground. For 12 days, the affliction progressed with relentless certainty. Physicians from across the kingdom came to examine the stricken champion, bringing with them remedies that had cured plagues and healed wounds that should have proved fatal. But this was no earthly sickness that herbs or incantations might banish. This was judgment pronounced by immortal voices, and no mortal skill possessed the power to reverse what the celestial council had decreed. The ruler watched his brother's decline with an anguish that carved new lines into his face and turned his hair prematurely grey. He sat beside the sickbed through endless nights, holding conversations that grew more precious with each passing hour. They spoke of their adventures together, of the changes they had brought to the kingdom, of dreams they would never share, and victories they would never celebrate side by side. On the 7th night of the illness, the dying champion was visited by visions that transported him beyond the boundaries of the living world. He saw the realm of the dead stretching before him in all its terrible majesty, a vast underground kingdom where shadows of former lives wandered through chambers carved from living rock, sustained by dust and darkness, their memories of sunlight growing fainter with each passing age. I have seen where I am going, he whispered to his friend as dawn broke over the city walls. It is a place where kings and commoners wear the same grey robes, where the proud and the humble eat the same bitter bread. There is no joy there, no laughter, no music except the endless sighing of those who remember what they have lost. The vision continued across subsequent nights, each dream revealing new horrors of the afterlife that awaited all who drew breath. The woodland warrior saw himself transformed into a creature of shadow and regret, his magnificent strength reduced to memories that would fade like smoke in the windless air of the underworld. He saw the countless souls who had preceded him into that grey realm, their faces marked by the resignation that came with understanding that this existence had no end and no hope of return. "Promise me," he gasped during one of his lucid moments, gripping his friend's hand with fingers that trembled despite their supernatural origin. "Promise me that you will not let them forget. The people of our kingdom, the children who played in streets made safe by our protection. Tell them that we tried to build something better. Tell them that friendship between those who hold power can bring justice instead of oppression." The ruler made that promise, with tears streaming down his face, knowing even as he spoke the words that mere remembrance would never be enough to fill the void that was opening in his heart. As the 12th day dawned, bringing with it the final chapter of his brother's earthly existence, he made a different kind of vow, one that would drive him to the edges of the world and beyond, in pursuit of a power that might prove stronger than death itself. The end came peacefully as the sun reached its zenith above the palace towers. The woodland champion simply closed his eyes and ceased to draw breath, his face settling into an expression of such profound tranquility that those who witnessed his passing found themselves wondering if death might be less terrible than they had always believed. But for the ruler who had lost his dearest friend, there was no peace in that tranquil countenance, only the unbearable finality of separation. For 7 days and 7 nights, the monarch refused to allow the burial rites to proceed. He sat beside the body as it began to show signs of mortal decay, as if his presence alone might somehow reverse the natural processes that claimed all flesh. Servants approached with preparations for entombment, only to be driven away by a grief so raw and desperate that it seemed to fill the air around their master with visible darkness. It was only when corruption became unmistakable, when even supernatural preservation could no longer maintain the illusion of sleep, that the ruler finally accepted what his eyes had been trying to deny. His friend was truly gone, transformed from living companion to mere clay that would return to the earth from which it had come. The acknowledgement of this truth broke something fundamental in the monarch's spirit, releasing a wail of anguish that echoed through the palace and across the city like the cry of a wounded animal. The funeral that followed was magnificent beyond all precedent. The entire kingdom mourned the loss of the champion who had helped transform their lives. But none mourned with the devastating intensity of the one who had lost not just an ally, but the other half of his soul. As the tomb was sealed and the rituals concluded, the ruler made an announcement that shocked his advisors and terrified his subjects. He would abandon his throne and his responsibilities to seek out the secret of eternal life. Somewhere in the world, according to legends that stretched back to the earliest days of creation, lived one who had achieved true immortality, not the shadowy half-existence of the underworld, but the continuation of life itself beyond the reach of death. If such a being existed, if such knowledge could be found, then perhaps there was still hope of reuniting with the friend whose loss had made existence unbearable. The advisors pleaded with their master to reconsider this desperate plan. The kingdom needed his leadership, they argued. His people depended on the wisdom and justice he had learned to exercise. Abandoning his duties to chase myths and legends would undo all the progress they had achieved together, returning the realm to the chaos and oppression that had marked the earlier years of his reign. But the monarch's determination had crystallized into something harder than bronze, more enduring than stone. He would find the secret of immortality, or he would die in the attempt. Either outcome seemed preferable to spending the remainder of his days haunted by memories of what he had lost, surrounded by reminders of conversations that would never continue, and adventures that would never be shared. The preparations for departure were swift and stark. The ruler exchanged his royal robes for the rough clothing of a traveler, his golden crown for a simple cap that would protect him from sun and rain. He took with him only the most basic supplies: water, dried food, a weapon forged from the finest metal the kingdom's smiths could produce. Everything else he left behind, including the throne that had defined his identity since youth. The legends he sought to verify spoke of one called Utnapishtim, known as the Distant One, a mortal who had achieved immortality through divine favor during the great catastrophe that had once threatened to destroy all life on Earth. According to the oldest stories, this being dwelt somewhere beyond the edges of the known world, in a realm accessible only to those willing to brave perils that had claimed the lives of countless seekers before them. The journey began at the city gates, where hundreds of citizens gathered to bid farewell to the ruler who had transformed their lives. They watched in silence as he walked away from everything he had built, his figure growing smaller with distance until it disappeared beyond the horizon, like a ship sailing into unknown waters. The first months of travel took him through familiar territory, lands he had governed, roads he had ordered built, settlements that had prospered under his reformed administration. But as he moved farther from the center of his former domain, the landscape grew wilder and more dangerous. Bandits lurked in remote passes. Wild beasts hunted in forests that had never known the axe or plow, and natural obstacles tested his resolve at every turn. He learned to sleep in caves and hollow trees, to find water in places where none seemed to exist, to defend himself against predators, both human and animal, with skills that had grown rusty during his years of comfortable rule. The softness that palace living had cultivated was burned away by exposure to sun and wind, replaced by the lean hardness of someone for whom survival was no longer guaranteed by rank or wealth. Months became seasons. Seasons became years, as the former monarch pushed deeper into regions where maps failed and rumors replaced reliable knowledge. He followed stories told by wandering merchants, pursued legends shared around campfires by those who claimed to have heard them from others who might have witnessed miraculous events. Each tale led him farther from the civilized world, deeper into territories where the very air seemed charged with possibilities that defied ordinary understanding. The most persistent rumors spoke of twin mountains that marked the edge of the world, peaks so tall that their summits disappeared into the realm of the stars themselves. Here, according to the oldest stories, lived guardians who possessed the secrets of life and death, beings who had witnessed the creation of the world and would remain until its final dissolution. To reach these guardians, the seeker would have to traverse a path of absolute darkness, a journey through regions where the sun never penetrated and the very concept of direction lost all meaning. After 2 years of increasingly perilous travel, the wanderer found himself standing before an obstacle that seemed to confirm the truth of the legends he had been pursuing. Rising before him were mountains whose scale dwarfed anything he had previously imagined possible. These peaks stretched upward beyond the reach of vision, their slopes disappearing into clouds that seemed to merge with the dome of the sky itself. At the base of these impossible heights stood figures that might once have been human, but had been transformed by centuries of duty into something altogether different. The Scorpion Men, as legend named them, possessed the torsos and heads of mortals, but the bodies and stinger-tipped tails of the greatest desert predators. Their eyes held the wisdom of ages, and their voices carried the authority of those who had stood watch at the boundaries of existence since time began. "Turn back, wanderer," spoke the eldest of these guardians, his words carrying both compassion and absolute finality. "What you seek lies beyond the reach of mortal determination. The path ahead leads through 12 leagues of absolute darkness, where the absence of light is so complete that it becomes a living thing that devours hope and sanity alike. No one who has entered that realm has ever emerged to tell of what lies beyond. But the former ruler had traveled too far and sacrificed too much to be turned back by warnings, however dire. I seek Utnapishtim, the distant," he replied, his voice hoarse from years of disuse except for necessary communication. "I seek the secret of life beyond death. If the path leads through darkness, then I will learn to see in darkness. If it leads through dangers that have claimed the lives of others, then I will prove myself stronger than they were." The Scorpion Men exchanged glances that spoke of centuries of similar encounters, all ending in tragedy for those who refused to accept the limitations of mortality. But they also recognized something in this particular seeker that set him apart from the merely ambitious or desperate. This was grief given form and purpose, love transformed into an irresistible force that would not be denied by any obstacle short of absolute impossibility. "Very well," the Guardian finally said. "We cannot prevent you from attempting what others have failed to achieve. But know this, the darkness ahead is not merely the absence of light, but the presence of something that feeds on the memories and hopes that make life worth living. Many who enter emerge as hollow shells, their souls consumed by shadows that strip away everything that once made them human." The warning given, the Scorpion Men stepped aside and revealed the entrance to the path of darkness, a tunnel carved into the living rock of the mountain, its opening so perfectly black that it seemed to absorb light from the surrounding air. No sound emerged from its depths. No hint of air movement suggested what lay beyond the first few steps into its embrace. The seeker paused at the threshold, understanding that this moment marked a transition from which there could be no return. Behind him lay the world of light and life, the realm where memory still offered the possibility of connection with what he had lost. Ahead lay the unknown, territory that might hold the answers he sought, or might destroy everything that remained of his identity in the seeking. Drawing upon reserves of courage he had not known he possessed, the former monarch stepped into the absolute darkness and began the most perilous journey of his quest. The path ahead would test not only his physical endurance, but his spiritual resilience, challenging his understanding of what it meant to be human and what price was worth paying, for the chance to transcend the limitations that bound all mortal existence. Behind him, the Scorpion Men resumed their eternal vigil, adding one more name to the long list of those who had chosen to brave the impossible, rather than accept the unchangeable nature of loss. Whether this seeker would join the ranks of the lost or emerge as something unprecedented in their long experience remained to be seen in the darkness that lay ahead. The passage through absolute darkness lasted an eternity and an instant, defying every natural law that governed the perception of time and space. The wanderer walked through a void so complete that he began to question whether his feet still touched solid ground, whether his lungs still drew breath, whether his heart continued to beat in the silence that seemed to swallow even the sound of his own existence. In this realm, where light had never penetrated, strange visions began to assault his consciousness. He saw his lost companion calling to him from distances that could not be measured, heard conversations they had shared echoing back from walls that might not exist. The void fed on recollection and longing, transforming cherished moments into instruments of torment that tested his sanity with each step forward. Hours passed, or perhaps years. Measurement became meaningless in a place where the sun never rose, and shadows held substance while matter dissolved into uncertainty. The traveler pressed onward by pure force of will, guided only by the conviction that somewhere ahead lay answers that would justify the price he was paying for their discovery. When illumination finally began to creep back into the world, it came not as a sudden revelation, but as a gradual warming that seemed to emerge from the very stones beneath his feet. The tunnel opened onto a landscape unlike anything he had witnessed in his travels. A garden where jeweled trees bore fruit of crystallized light, where streams flowed with water that sang as it moved, where the air itself seemed to sparkle with particles of living starfire. At the heart of this impossible paradise stood a figure that radiated the accumulated experience of ages. The tavern keeper appeared as a woman neither young nor old, her eyes holding depths that spoke of having witnessed the birth and dissolution of countless civilizations. Her establishment, part inn, part sanctuary, part threshold between worlds, served as a resting place for those rare travelers who managed to survive the passage through the realm of absolute shadow. "Welcome, wanderer," she said, her voice carrying melodies that seemed to heal the wounds that the void had carved into his spirit. "Few emerge from the path you have traveled with their sanity intact. Fewer still arrive here, driven by the particular anguish I see burning in your eyes. Tell me, what tragedy has driven you to seek what no mortal was meant to find?" The traveler found himself pouring out his story as if the words had been dammed behind his lips for the entire expedition. He spoke of the bond that had transformed his life, of the connection that had made him understand what it meant to be truly human, of the bereavement that had left him hollow and yearning for any chance of reunion with the one who had given his existence meaning. The keeper listened with the patience of one who had heard countless tales of sorrow and longing, her expression growing increasingly troubled as she comprehended the magnitude of what he sought to achieve. When he finished speaking, she remained silent for long moments, weighing her response with the care of someone who understood that words possessed the power to either heal or destroy. "Your devotion to your companion honors you both," she said finally. "But the path you have chosen leads only to greater suffering. Deathlessness is not a gift, but a burden. Not a reunion, but a separation from everything that makes existence meaningful. The secret you seek exists, but those who possess it have paid prices that would make death seem a mercy by comparison." She gestured toward the crystalline garden that surrounded her dwelling, its beauty marred by an underlying sense of isolation that spoke of centuries spent in solitude. "I have tended this place since before your civilization learned to count the years, watching pilgrims like yourself arrive broken by tragedy and leave broken by the revelations they discovered. The deathless life you imagine, filled with joy and companionship restored, exists only in the fevered hopes of those who have not yet learned what infinity truly means." But the wanderer's determination had been tempered by trials that made mere words seem like whispers against hurricane winds. "Then let me learn for myself what infinity means," he replied. "Let me discover whether the price is worth paying. If I am to be broken by revelation, then let me be broken by awareness rather than by ignorance." Recognizing the futility of further argument, The keeper provided directions to the dwelling of the distant one, along with warnings about the final obstacles that lay between the traveler and his goal. The deathless survivor lived beyond waters that separated the realm of the living from territories where natural laws held no dominion, accessible only to those willing to cross oceans that existed as much in spirit as in substance. The boatman, guardian of the vessel that could navigate these impossible waters, initially refused to transport another pilgrim on what he considered a futile quest. He had carried countless passengers across the waters of dissolution and beyond, had witnessed the transformation of expectation into despair, as mortals discovered revelations they were not equipped to comprehend. "Turn back," he counseled, his aged hands steady on the tiller of a boat that seemed to be constructed from crystallized moonlight and captured starfire. "Every passenger I have carried to the dwelling of the distant one has returned changed in ways that made them wish they had never undertaken the expedition." Awareness of deathlessness is not a treasure to be seized, but a curse to be endured. Yet something in the traveler's demeanor, perhaps the depth of his anguish, perhaps the purity of his determination, eventually moved the boatman to compassion. With reluctance born of experience, but tempered by recognition of the irresistible nature of devotion, transformed into obsession, he agreed to provide passage across waters that reflected not sky but the recollections of all who had gazed into their depths. The voyage lasted 7 days and 7 nights, carrying them across seas that changed character with each league traveled. Sometimes the waters ran clear as mountain springs, revealing depths that seemed to contain entire worlds. Sometimes they turned dark as midnight, their surfaces disturbed by movements that suggested the presence of beings too vast and alien for mortal comprehension. On the final day, their destination appeared on the horizon, an island that existed outside the normal flow of time, where seasons held no meaning, and the very concept of change had been suspended by forces beyond natural understanding. Here dwelt the sole survivor of the great deluge that had once threatened to cleanse the world of all life, preserved by divine intervention to serve as a living reminder of both celestial mercy and celestial wrath. The deathless being who emerged to greet his visitor appeared as an ordinary man, neither young nor old, marked by neither the vigor of youth nor the frailty of age. Only his eyes betrayed the weight of centuries, holding within them the accumulated experience and weariness of one who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and dissolution of stars, the endless cycle of creation and destruction that marked the passage of cosmic time. "So," he said, his voice carrying the patience of one who had long ago learned to measure conversation in terms of centuries rather than moments, "another pilgrim arrives in pursuit of the impossible. Tell me, wanderer, what makes you believe that you deserve what gods have granted to no other mortal since the world was young?" The traveler repeated his tale, describing the bond that had given his life meaning and the bereavement that had driven him to the edges of existence in search of restoration. He spoke with the eloquence of one who understood that this might be his final opportunity to achieve the goal that had sustained him through trials that should have destroyed his sanity. The ancient survivor listened with the detached interest of one who had heard every possible variation of mortal anguish, his expression revealing neither sympathy nor contempt, but rather a kind of cosmic fatigue that came from having witnessed the same tragic patterns repeated across countless generations. "You seek deathlessness," the Ancient One said when the tale was complete, "but you do not understand what you are asking. Let me tell you the price of infinite existence, and then see if your determination survives the revelation." He spoke then of the great flood that had destroyed the world, describing waters that had risen beyond the highest mountains, storms that had raged for 40 days and 40 nights, the terrible silence that had followed when every living thing, except those preserved in his vessel, had perished beneath the waves. The gods had granted him deathlessness, not as a reward, but as a punishment, condemning him to infinite existence as the sole witness to the greatest tragedy in mortal history. "Do you see these hands?" the survivor asked, extending arms that appeared perfectly normal despite their impossible age. "They have built and buried more civilizations than you have years in your life. This mind has learned and forgotten more languages than currently exist in your world. This heart has loved and lost more souls than populate your kingdom. Deathlessness is not the preservation of what you cherish. It is the guarantee that you will watch everything you cherish crumble into dust while you remain unchanged." But even this revelation failed to shatter the traveler's resolve. "Then teach me to endure such a burden," he replied. "Show me how to bear the weight of infinite existence. If the price of possibly reuniting with my companion is the pain of watching everything else pass away, then I will pay that price gladly." The survivor studied his visitor with eyes that had observed the folly of mortals for centuries beyond counting. Finally, he proposed a test that would demonstrate the futility of the quest while providing its own form of merciful education. "Very well," he said, "but first, prove to me that you possess even the most basic requirement for deathless existence. Stay awake for 7 days and 7 nights. Show me that you can resist the simple human need for sleep before asking to transcend the ultimate human limitation of mortality." The challenge seemed laughably simple after the ordeals the wanderer had already endured. Surely someone who had walked through absolute shadow and crossed the waters of infinity could resist the mere physical need for rest. He settled himself in a comfortable position and prepared to demonstrate his worthiness for the gift he sought. But the deathless survivor understood what his visitor did not, that the human body and spirit possessed limits that could not be overcome by determination alone. As the first day progressed, fatigue began to accumulate in ways that defied the traveler's attempts to resist. The comfortable dwelling, the gentle sounds of wind and water, the very peace he had sought for so long, began to work against his conscious will to remain alert. Despite his heroic efforts, despite the strength that had carried him across half the world in pursuit of his goal, the wanderer succumbed to slumber before the first day was complete. He fell into dreams filled with visions of his lost companion, conversations that felt more real than any waking experience, moments of connection that made the struggle to remain conscious seem petty and unnecessary. The survivor's wife, moved by compassion for the sleeping figure, marked each day of his unconsciousness by placing fresh bread beside him, loaves that aged and molded as the days passed, creating a calendar of his failure that would greet him upon awakening. When the traveler finally stirred after 7 full days of deep slumber, the evidence of his defeat surrounded him in the form of bread, ranging from fresh to completely spoiled. "Behold the proof of your mortality," the Ancient One said gently. "You could not stay awake for a single week, yet you aspire to consciousness that would last for infinity. The human frame, no matter how strong, possesses limitations that cannot be transcended by will alone." The evidence was undeniable, the logic inescapable. Yet as the wanderer prepared to depart, broken by the recognition of his fundamental inadequacy for the goal he had pursued, the survivor's wife approached her husband with a request born of the same compassion that had led her to mark the passage of his sleeping days. "This one has traveled farther and sacrificed more than any who have come before," she said. "Though he cannot achieve what he seeks, perhaps we can offer him something that might ease the burden of his return passage." After long consideration, the ancient survivor shared one final secret. information about a plant that grew in the deepest parts of the ocean, a flower whose properties could restore youth to the aged and grant extended life to those wise enough to use it carefully. Though not true deathlessness, it offered the possibility of prolonged existence that might allow the wanderer to find some form of peace with his bereavement. The plant is called "The Old Man Becomes Young," the Deathless One explained. It grows only in the abyssal depths where even fish fear to venture. Retrieving it will require you to dive deeper than any mortal has ever attempted, to risk drowning in pursuit of a prize that may offer only temporary respite from the mortality you seek to escape. The location revealed, the traveler prepared for what might be his final adventure. The waters above the plant's resting place reflected the sky like polished metal, their surface calm as a mirror. But beneath that deceptive tranquility lay depths that descended into regions where sunlight had never penetrated, where pressure that could crush human bones created environments hostile to all terrestrial life. Binding stones to his feet to carry him down faster than he could swim, the wanderer plunged beneath the surface and began his descent into the heart of the ocean. The world above disappeared into a recollection of light, as he sank deeper into realms where only the most alien forms of life could survive the crushing weight of water. The plant, when he finally located it, growing from crevices in the sea floor, appeared unremarkable. A simple flower with petals that seemed to contain their own source of illumination. But the moment his fingers closed around its stem, he felt a surge of vitality that spoke of power beyond ordinary comprehension. This was indeed a treasure worth the expedition, a prize that might not grant true deathlessness, but could offer extended time to find meaning in a life that had been shattered by bereavement. The ascent to the surface required every remaining vestige of his strength, but he emerged from the depths, clutching the miraculous plant like a talisman against despair. For the first time since beginning his quest, he allowed himself to feel something approaching optimism. Though he had failed to achieve his ultimate goal, perhaps this partial victory might provide opportunities he had not previously imagined. The return passage began with the cautious expectation of one who had found treasure amid the ruins of his greatest ambition. He planned to test the plant's properties gradually, to understand its power before using it to extend his own existence. Perhaps with additional years at his disposal, he might discover other paths toward the reunion he sought, other ways to transcend the barriers that separated the living from the departed. But fate, it seemed, had one final lesson to teach about the relationship between expectation and tragedy, between human ambition and the natural order that governed all existence. On the third day of his homeward expedition, wearied by travel and lulled by the sense of having achieved at least partial success, the wanderer paused beside a spring to bathe and refresh himself. He placed the precious plant on the bank while he entered the cool water, allowing himself the luxury of washing away the salt and grime that had accumulated during his adventures. The simple pleasure of clean water against his skin, the peaceful sound of birds calling from nearby trees, the warmth of sunlight on his shoulders, all combined to create a moment of tranquility that felt like the first true peace he had known since his companion's departure. That moment of inattention proved costly beyond measure. A serpent, drawn by the unusual radiance emanating from the plant, emerged from the undergrowth and consumed the flower in a single swift motion. The wanderer watched in helpless horror as the creature underwent an immediate transformation, its old skin splitting and falling away, to reveal scales that gleamed with renewed vitality, its movements becoming fluid and graceful in ways that spoke of youth restored. The theft was so sudden, so complete, that for long moments the traveller could only stare at the place where his expectation had been. The serpent, revitalized by its prize, disappeared into the reeds with movements that mocked the slowness of human reflexes. The plant that might have granted extended life was gone, leaving behind only the bitter awareness of what had been briefly within reach. As the magnitude of this final setback settled upon him, something fundamental shifted in the wanderer's comprehension of his quest and its meaning. The laughter that emerged from his throat held no humor, only the recognition of a cosmic irony too perfect to be accidental. He had traveled to the edges of existence in pursuit of deathlessness, only to have it stolen by a creature that operated purely on instinct, without desire or sorrow or any of the complex emotions that had driven his expedition. But in that moment of absolute defeat, clarity began to dawn. Perhaps the lesson he needed to learn had never been about achieving deathlessness or reuniting with his lost companion. Perhaps the true enlightenment lay in recognizing why the quest itself had been necessary, what it had taught him about the nature of devotion and bereavement, and the human condition that made both possible. The homeward passage took 2 years, carrying him back across landscapes that now seemed familiar despite their initial strangeness. He traveled not as a frantic pilgrim racing toward an impossible goal, but as a man gradually learning to carry sorrow without allowing it to destroy everything else that made existence meaningful. Each mile covered was a step toward accepting what could not be changed while honoring what had been lost. When the walls of his city finally appeared on the horizon, the sight struck him with unexpected force. Here was the civilization he had helped to build, the kingdom he had transformed through the enlightenment gained in companionship, the legacy of the bond that mortality had broken but could not erase. The walls themselves seemed to tell a story, not just of protection from external threats, but of human determination to create something lasting in a world where nothing lasted forever. The people who gathered to welcome their returning ruler were changed as much as he was. The years of his absence had taught them to govern themselves according to the principles he and his companion had established, to seek justice without waiting for royal decree, to show mercy because they had learned its value rather than because authority demanded it. They had become worthy of the leadership they had once needed to learn by example. In the palace where he had once shared wine and laughter with his dearest ally, the wanderer began the final phase of his education in the nature of deathlessness. Not the literal version he had sought in distant lands, but the form that came from creating something worthy of preservation, from touching lives in ways that continued to influence the world long after the original touch had ended. He commissioned scribes to record the full story of his bond and his quest, recognizing that recollection preserved in written form possessed a kind of permanence that no physical existence could match. The tale of 2 champions who had found in each other the missing pieces of their souls would be copied and recopied, told and retold, translated into languages that did not yet exist for peoples not yet born. The walls of the city became more than mere fortification in his eyes. They became symbols of everything that human effort could achieve when guided by enlightenment and tempered by recognition of mortality's gifts rather than its limitations. Within those walls lived people who had learned to create beauty, to seek illumination, to show compassion, to build something greater than the sum of their individual lives. In the end, the wanderer who had traveled to the edges of existence in pursuit of literal deathlessness discovered that he had possessed a form of infinite life all along, not in his own continued existence, but in the influence he had exercised on others, the changes he had helped to create, the devotion he had shared with a companion whose recollection would outlive them both. The bond that had begun in combat and been sealed in adventure would never truly end, because it had become part of the story that defined what it meant to be human. In choosing to remember rather than forget, to honor rather than abandon, to build rather than destroy, mortals created their own form of deathlessness, one that required no divine intervention, no magical plants, no expeditions to impossible lands. The walls of the city stood as testament to this revelation, reminders that the greatest monuments were not tombs that preserved the departed, but communities that nurtured the living. And in the preservation of recollection, in the continuation of ideals, in the endless human effort to create meaning from mortality, the bond of the two champions achieved the only form of infinite existence that truly mattered, influence that continued to shape the world long after life itself had ended.